The phone rang at 2:47 a.m. I knew before I answered that something was wrong. In my 28 years with the FBI, I'd learned to trust that instinct, the one that wakes you seconds before disaster calls. Aunt Diana? Her voice was barely a whisper. Priya? Where are you? I'm in my car, outside a gas station on Route 26. I didn't know where else to go. That's when I heard it, the tremor beneath her words, the kind I'd heard in hundreds of witness interviews, the sound of someone whose world had just shattered. Stay there, don't move, I'm coming. I was out of bed in seconds, pulling on jeans and a jacket. My husband had been gone 3 years now, heart attack at 62, and I lived alone in our house in Portland's West Hills. The drive to Route 26 would take 20 minutes at this hour. I made it in 14. When I pulled into the Shell station, I spotted her white Toyota immediately. She was hunched in the driver's seat, and even in the harsh fluorescent light, I could see she was shaking. I tapped on her window. She startled, then saw it was me and unlocked the door. Priya, honey, look at me. She turned, and my blood went cold. Her left eye was swollen nearly shut. Blood had dried at the corner of her mouth. Her silk blouse, the expensive one her husband had bought her for their anniversary, was torn at the shoulder. But it was her hands that told the real story. Her knuckles were scraped raw, defensive wounds from trying to protect herself. I'd documented injuries like these 1,000 times, photographed them, cataloged them, used them to put monsters behind bars. But this wasn't a case file, this was Priya, my goddaughter, the little girl I'd watched grow up. The one who used to sleep over at my house and beg me to tell her stories about catching bank robbers. Who did this to you? I already knew, but I needed her to say it. Aunt Diana, Her voice broke. It was Nathan, my husband. He hit me. Nathan Chambers, 41 years old, owner of Chambers Development, the biggest residential real estate company in Portland. The man who'd swept Priya off her feet 3 years ago with his charm and his money and his promises. The man I'd never trusted. How long has this been happening? She looked away. 6 months. Maybe longer. I can't remember exactly when it started. 6 months. Half a year of my goddaughter suffering in silence while I'd been having Sunday dinners with them, watching him play the devoted husband, never seeing the monster underneath. Why tonight? What triggered him? Priya's hands twisted in her lap. He came home drunk from a work event. I could smell perfume on him, not mine. When I asked about it, he said I was paranoid. I told him I'd seen text messages on his phone from someone named Vanessa. That's when She touched her swollen eye gently. He said if I ever went through his phone again, it would be worse. Vanessa. The name seared itself into my memory. We're going to the hospital, I said. Right now. No, Aunt Diana, please. If I go to the ER, they'll have to report it. Nathan has friends in the police department. He's donated thousands to the Police Athletic League. They'll call him, and he'll what? She looked at me with eyes full of fear I'd seen in too many victims. He told me if I ever tried to leave him, he'd make sure I got deported. I'm here on a work visa, remember? He said he knows an immigration lawyer who could prove our marriage was fraudulent. He'd tell them I only married him for a green card. My hands clenched on the steering wheel. Abuse of power, immigration threat, financial control, classic tactics. I'd profiled hundreds of abusers in my career. Nathan was textbook. Listen to me very carefully, I said. I spent nearly 3 decades tracking people who hurt others. I know how to build cases that stick, and I promise Nathan will answer for this. But he's so powerful, Aunt Diana. Everyone in Portland knows him. The mayor comes to his charity events. He has lawyers on retainer, and You're just what? A woman who doesn't deserve to be beaten? I softened my voice. Priya, you're a 3rd-grade teacher. You teach children to read. You help immigrant families navigate the school system because you remember what it was like when your parents brought you here from Mumbai. You're worth 100 of him. She started crying then. Not the quiet tears she'd been holding back, but deep, wrenching sobs. I held her in that gas station parking lot while semis roared past on the highway, and I made a decision that would undo 3 years of quiet retirement. I was going back to work. We went to the hospital anyway, but not the main one in Portland. I drove us to a smaller facility in Gresham where I knew the head of the ER, Dr. Sarah Chen. We'd worked together on human trafficking cases years ago. She understood discretion. Sarah took one look at Priya and got her into an exam room immediately. Diana, she said quietly, while we waited in the hallway. The injuries are consistent with blunt force trauma. 2 cracked ribs, significant bruising. The eye will need monitoring for retinal damage. This wasn't a first-time incident. I know. Are you going to report this? Eventually. But I need to do this right. He's connected. Sarah nodded. She understood. I'll document everything. Photos, x-rays, written report, all dated and time-stamped. When you're ready, you'll have it. While Priya was being treated, I stepped outside and made 2 calls. The first was to James Donovan. He'd been an assistant U.S. attorney when I was still with the Bureau. Now he ran his own practice specializing in domestic violence cases. Diana, it's 3 a.m. I need your help. My goddaughter. Domestic violence. Perpetrator is Nathan Chambers. There was a long pause. The developer? Christ, Diana. That's going to be complicated. I know. That's why I'm calling you. Give me 24 hours to clear my schedule. Don't let her go home. Don't let her contact him. And whatever you do, don't confront him yourself. The second call was to Marcus Rivera, my former partner at the Bureau. He'd retired 2 years before me and now ran a private investigation firm. Please tell me this isn't about a case, he groaned. It's personal. And I need surveillance equipment. The good stuff. Diana. Marcus, I wouldn't ask if it wasn't important. He sighed. I'll have a kit ready by noon. But you're buying lunch. When Priya was discharged, I took her back to my house. She sat at my kitchen table, wrapped in one of my oversized sweaters, looking smaller than I'd ever seen her. I can't go back there, she whispered. You won't. You'll stay here as long as you need to. But my things. We'll get them. Later. When it's safe. I poured her tea. Right now, I need you to tell me everything. Start from the beginning. It took 3 hours. The story came out in pieces, the way trauma always does. Nathan had been perfect at first. Flowers, weekend trips to wine country. He'd paid off her student loans $28,000 as a wedding gift. He'd supported her teaching career, bragged about her to his friends. The control started subtly. Checking her phone, asking who she'd talked to, getting upset if she didn't text him back immediately. Then he started criticizing her clothes, her friends, the time she spent with her parents. The first time he hit her was 7 months ago. They'd been arguing about his late nights at work. She'd accused him of having an affair. He'd slapped her so hard she'd fallen against the kitchen counter. He'd apologized, cried, said he'd been stressed about a deal falling through, promised it would never happen again. It happened again 2 weeks later. And then again. And again. Why didn't you tell me? I asked, though I already knew the answer. I was ashamed. You're this amazing woman who caught criminals for a living. You've always been so strong. I didn't want you to think I was weak. Priya, you're not weak. You're surviving. Am I? Because right now I feel like I'm drowning. I reached across the table and took her hand. Then let me throw you a rope. The next morning, I started building the case. First, I drove to Nathan's office building downtown. Chambers Development occupied the top 3 floors of a glass tower on Broadway. I parked across the street with the surveillance camera Marcus had loaned me and watched. Nathan arrived at 9:15 a.m. in his Tesla, looking exactly like the successful businessman he portrayed himself as. Tailored suit, expensive watch. The man who'd beaten his wife 12 hours ago showed no signs of guilt. At 11:30, a woman arrived. Late 20s, striking, dressed in a pencil skirt and heels. She went straight up to his floor. I ran her license plate. Vanessa Mitchell, age 27. Employed by Mitchell Marketing Solutions, a firm that, according to a quick Google search, handled all of Chambers Development's advertising. The Mistress. She didn't leave until 2 p.m., and when she did, her hair was different, her lipstick freshly applied. I photographed everything. That afternoon, I met with James Donovan at his office. Here's the situation, he said, spreading documents across his desk. Nathan Chambers is a problem. He's donated heavily to the mayor's re-election campaign. He sits on the board of 3 major nonprofits. Half the city council has attended his fundraisers. If we go after him, we need to be bulletproof. What do we need? Documentation of abuse. Medical records, you've got that. Witnesses. Evidence of financial control. And we need her to file a police report, which will establish a paper trail for the restraining order. He's threatened her with deportation. James nodded grimly. Immigration coercion is a federal crime. If we can prove that, it strengthens our case. but it also means going up against his lawyers, and trust me, they'll fight dirty. So will I. He smiled. I remember, that's why I'm taking this case. Over the next 2 weeks, I worked the case like I was back in the bureau. I interviewed Priya's colleagues at the elementary school where she taught. 3 of them had noticed changes in her over the past year. One had seen bruises on her arms that Priya had blamed on clumsiness. Another had seen Nathan pick her up from work one day and watch through the window as he berated her in the car, his face inches from hers. I thought about saying something, the teacher told me, tears in her eyes, but I didn't want to overstep. How many times had I heard that? People who saw the signs but convinced themselves it wasn't their business. I pulled Nathan's financial records, publicly available information, through his business filings. He'd made $3.2 million last year. He owned 4 properties outright. He had accounts at 3 different banks. I discovered that Priya had no access to any of it. Their joint checking account, which he'd insisted on when they married, had only her teacher's salary deposited into it. His income went to accounts in his name only. Financial isolation. Another classic tactic. I tracked Vanessa Mitchell. She had lunch with Nathan twice a week at expensive restaurants. They took a trip to Seattle together the previous month. Nathan had told Priya it was a business conference. The hotel receipt I obtained through a contact told a different story. 1 room, king bed, charged to his personal credit card. But the breakthrough came from an unexpected source. I was having coffee at a shop near Nathan's office when I overheard 2 women talking at the next table. I'm just saying, I feel bad for his wife, one of them said. Everyone knows he's cheating on her. With Vanessa? Who else? But did you hear about the last one? The woman who used to work for him? My ears perked up. The paralegal? What was her name? Jennifer something? Jennifer Ortiz. Apparently he was sleeping with her too, and when she tried to end it, he fired her. She tried to sue, but his lawyers crushed her. She had to sign an NDA just to get severance. Jennifer Ortiz. Another victim. It took me 3 days to find her. She'd left Portland after the lawsuit and moved to Eugene. She was working as a legal secretary at a small firm. I drove down to meet her. I don't want to talk about Nathan Chambers, she said immediately when I explained why I was there. I understand. But my goddaughter is married to him, he's beating her, and I think you might be the key to stopping him. Jennifer's face went pale. He's beating her? Yes. She was quiet for a long moment. Then, he never hit me. But he did threaten me. When I told him I was going to report the affair to HR, he said he'd destroy my career. He said no one in Portland would hire me. He had lawyers send me letters saying I was violating confidentiality clauses. Eventually, I just gave up. Would you be willing to testify about that? About the pattern of behavior? I signed an NDA. An NDA doesn't protect criminal behavior. If we can establish that he has a history of threatening and intimidating women, it strengthens our case. She looked out the window of the coffee shop where we Saturday. If I do this, he'll come after me again. Not if he's in jail. Finally, she nodded. Okay, I'll do it. Someone needs to stop him. 3 weeks after that phone call in the middle of the night, we filed charges. Assault in the 2nd degree. Coercion. Criminal mischief for the property he'd destroyed during his rages. Priya's laptop, her phone, items that belonged to her. We also filed for an emergency restraining order. Nathan's response was immediate and vicious. His lawyer held a press conference. They painted Priya as an opportunist who'd married Nathan for money and was now trying to extort him in a divorce. They said she was emotionally unstable. They hinted that she'd been having an affair and was trying to deflect blame. The Portland Tribune ran a story. Local developer denies abuse claims. The article featured quotes from Nathan's friends, a city councilman, a retired judge, the head of the Chamber of Commerce, all vouching for his character. Priya was devastated. Everyone believes him, she said, scrolling through social media comments. People she'd thought were friends had sided with Nathan. That's what abusers do, I told her. They're charming. They're beloved. That's how they get away with it for so long. But I hadn't been idle during Nathan's PR offensive. I'd spent those 3 weeks gathering every piece of evidence I could find. Marcus had helped me install a hidden camera near Nathan's office that caught him screaming at an employee so violently that the young man had tears running down his face. We had timestamps of his visits to Vanessa's apartment. We had Jennifer's testimony about his threats. And then we got lucky. One of Nathan's neighbors, an elderly woman who lived in the condo next to his, contacted James Donovan's office. "I heard the news," she said, "about his wife's accusations. And I want you to know, I believe her. I've heard them fighting. I've heard him shouting. One night, I heard something break and her screaming. I almost called 911, but my daughter talked me out of it. She said it wasn't my place to get involved in a marriage. Her name was Carol Brennan, and she agreed to testify. I'm 73 years old," she told me when I met her. "I don't care if Nathan Chambers and his lawyers try to intimidate me. I've lived through worse. That poor girl needs someone to stand up for her." The preliminary hearing was held on a gray Tuesday in October, 2 months after that phone call in the dark. Nathan arrived with 3 lawyers and an air of confidence. He wore a navy suit and an expression of injured innocence. Vanessa was there too, sitting in the back row, looking nervous. Priya sat next to me, her hands trembling despite the restraining order that kept Nathan on the opposite side of the courtroom. James Donovan presented our case methodically. He showed the photos from the hospital. Dr. Chen testified about the injuries. Priya's colleagues testified about the changes they'd witnessed. Carol Brennan described the night she'd heard Priya screaming. Jennifer Ortiz took the stand and described Nathan's pattern of threats and intimidation. Nathan's lawyers tried to discredit every witness. They suggested Priya's injuries could have come from anywhere. They implied her colleagues were biased. They attempted to portray Jennifer as a disgruntled employee. But they couldn't explain the evidence. We had text messages from Nathan to Priya that James had recovered from her cloud backup. Messages that said things like, "If you ever embarrass me like that again, you'll regret it, and you're nothing without me, and try to leave and see what happens." We had financial records showing his absolute control over their money. We had surveillance footage of him with Vanessa. And then James played his trump card. "Your Honor, I'd like to call Diana Foster to the stand." I took my seat and was sworn in. "Miss Foster, can you describe your professional background?" "I spent 28 years with the Federal Bureau of Investigation, specializing in violent crimes and human trafficking cases. I've investigated over 200 cases involving domestic abuse, coercive control, and violence against women." "And what is your relationship to the plaintiff?" "Priya Sharma is my goddaughter. I've known her since she was 6 years old." "In your professional opinion, based on your expertise and the evidence you've reviewed in this case, what would you say about the defendant's behavior?" Nathan's lawyer objected, but the judge allowed the question. "In my professional opinion, Nathan Chambers exhibits a textbook pattern of abusive behavior: financial control, isolation of the victim, threats involving immigration status to maintain power, escalating violence, use of social status to discredit the victim. This is not an isolated incident. This is a systematic campaign of abuse designed to maintain dominance over his wife." The courtroom was silent. When I stepped down, I looked at Nathan. For the first time, his confident mask had slipped. He looked worried. The judge issued the temporary restraining order and set a trial date for the criminal charges. But the real battle happened outside the courtroom. Nathan's lawyers launched a campaign to discredit me. They suggested I was biased. They filed motions to exclude my testimony. They hired their own expert witness, a psychiatrist who'd never met Priya, but was willing to suggest she had borderline personality disorder and was prone to fabrication. The Portland business community, which had embraced Nathan for years, didn't know what to do. Some stood by him, others quietly distanced themselves. The turning point came when Vanessa Mitchell contacted James Donovan's office. She wanted to talk. We met her at a restaurant in Beaverton, away from Portland's downtown, where someone might recognize her. Vanessa looked different than she had in court, younger without the professional armor. Scared. "I didn't know," she said before we'd even ordered. "About the abuse. Nathan told me his marriage was over. He said they were separated. He said Priya was difficult and unstable." "Did you believe him?" I asked. "Yes. God help me, I did. He was so convincing." She twisted her napkin. "But then I saw the photos from the hospital, and I started thinking about things I'd ignored. The way he talked about women, how angry he'd get when things didn't go his way. One time, he threw his phone across his office because a deal fell through. It shattered. He just bought a new one like it was nothing." "Why did you decide to come forward?" James asked. "Because I looked at those photos and realized that could have been me, if I'd said the wrong thing, if I'd tried to leave him. He was capable of that violence, and I'd convinced myself he was just passionate. I was lying to myself." "Would you be willing to testify about his temper? About the things he told you regarding Priya?" She nodded. "Yes, whatever you need." With Vanessa's testimony, Nathan's defense crumbled. The trial lasted 5 days. Nathan took the stand and tried to explain away everything. The injuries were from a fall. The text messages were taken out of context. Vanessa was lying because he'd ended things with her. Jennifer was bitter. Carol Brennan was a confused old woman. But juries aren't stupid. They saw through him. When Priya testified, she was nervous but clear. She described the progression of abuse, the isolation, the fear, the night she'd called me from that gas station. "Why did you call your godmother instead of the police?" Nathan's lawyer asked, trying to suggest she was manufacturing a story. "Because I knew the police wouldn't believe me," Priya said quietly. "My husband had told me many times that he had friends in the department, that if I ever reported him, they'd take his side. But I knew Aunt Diana would believe me, and I knew she'd know what to do." The jury deliberated for 3 hours. When they came back, Nathan was standing between his lawyers, still looking confident. "On the charge of assault in the 2nd degree, how do you find?" "Guilty." "On the charge of coercion?" "Guilty." "On the charge of criminal mischief?" "Guilty." Nathan's face went white. One of his lawyers put a hand on his shoulder to steady him. The sentencing hearing was 2 weeks later. Nathan's lawyers brought character witnesses, business partners, employees, people from his church. They all testified about his generosity, his community involvement, his one mistake. James Donovan brought different witnesses. Priya's 3rd-grade students had made cards for her. The judge allowed a dozen of them to be entered into evidence. Crayon drawings that said, "We miss you, Mrs. Chambers, and you're the best teacher." Carol Brennan testified again. "That young woman has to rebuild her entire life because of what he did. He should face real consequences." Dr. Chen provided testimony about the long-term effects of domestic violence on victims. And I spoke about the reality of abuse. "Your Honor, Nathan Chambers is not a good man who made a mistake. He is a calculating abuser who used his wealth and status to victimize a woman who trusted him. He threatened her with deportation. He controlled every aspect of her life. He beat her repeatedly and then used his money and influence to make her look like the villain. If that's not deserving of the maximum sentence, I don't know what is." The judge sentenced Nathan to 30 months in prison, followed by 5 years of probation. He was ordered to pay Priya $250,000 in damages for medical expenses, lost wages, and emotional distress. The restraining order was made permanent. Chambers Development's board forced him to resign. Several of his business partners ended their relationships with him. The mayor quietly returned his campaign donations. Priya filed for divorce the next day. The legal battle continued for months. His lawyers fought the divorce settlement, trying to minimize what Priya would receive, but eventually, he ran out of appeals. 6 months after the trial, Priya came to my house for dinner. She looked different, lighter. She'd cut her hair short. She was smiling. "I got the job," she said. "Which job?" "The principal position. At the new elementary school opening in Selwood. They wanted someone who understood trauma-informed education." I hugged her. "I'm so proud of you. I couldn't have done any of this without you, Aunt Diana. You did the hard part. You survived. You testified. You refused to let him break you." She was quiet for a moment. "Do you think he'll come after me when he gets out?" "Honestly, I think he's too much of a coward. His reputation is destroyed. His business is in ruins. You've moved on and rebuilt your life. He has nothing left to take from you. I still think about it sometimes, what my life would be like if I hadn't called you that night. But you did. That took courage. Or desperation. Sometimes they're the same thing." We had dinner on my back porch as the sun set over Portland. Priya told me about her plans for the new school, about the apartment she'd just leased, about the date she'd gone on the previous week with a man she'd met at a teacher training workshop. "I'm not ready for anything serious," she said. But it was nice to have coffee with someone who just wanted to know me, not control me. As I watched her talk, animated and hopeful, I thought about all the cases I'd worked during my FBI career, the victims I'd helped, the predators I'd caught. But this one was different. This one was personal. And maybe that made all the difference. People ask me sometimes if I regret coming out of retirement for this case, if it was worth the stress, the long hours, the fight. I tell them I'd do it again in a heartbeat. Because that's what you do for family. You fight. You refuse to give up. You use every skill you have to protect the people you love. And when the system tries to fail them, you make damn sure it doesn't. Nathan Chambers thought his money and connections made him untouchable. He was wrong. I'd spent 3 decades learning how to take down people who hurt others. He was just one more name on a very long list. The difference was, this time, it wasn't just a case number. It was personal. And I don't lose when it's personal.